Nigel Farage's growing influence over Reform UK has ignited intense debate both within the party and among its broader base of supporters. Many argue that the party's original values are being diluted, particularly as controversial figures like Tommy Robinson, once viewed by many as a defender of free speech and justice, are increasingly marginalized. Robinson, who built a strong following by speaking out against government overreach and policing, has resonated with communities that feel their concerns, particularly around immigration and national identity, have been ignored by mainstream politics. However, under the leadership of Richard Tice and with the backing of Farage, Reform UK has made a conscious decision to distance itself from Robinson. This strategic shift is designed to recast Reform UK as a more moderate, palatable alternative to the Conservative Party. Tice and Farage believe that by stepping away from Robinson's more radical image, the party can broaden its appeal and attract voters from across the political spectrum. The goal is to position Reform UK as a credible force that addresses the nation's key issues, such as immigration, law and order, and national sovereignty, without being associated with the extremism often linked to Robinson's activism. While this repositioning might draw in more moderate voters and even disaffected conservatives, it comes with significant risks. The core grassroots supporters who propelled Reform UK's rise are feeling increasingly alienated. For many of these supporters, particularly in working class communities, Robinson represents a voice for those who have been left behind by the political establishment. His distancing from the party is seen as a betrayal of the values that originally defined Reform UK, sparking concerns that their priorities, such as robust immigration policies and protecting free speech, are being sidelined in favour of political expediency. As frustrations grow, there is a real possibility that these disillusioned supporters may start looking elsewhere for political representation. Other groups that align more closely with Robinson's views could capitalise on this discontent, potentially siphoning off the very base that Reform UK once relied on. This balancing act between appealing to moderate voters and retaining the loyalty of its original supporters will be a critical test for Tice and Farage's leadership as the party navigates its future in an increasingly polarised political landscape. Richard Tice's strategy is a calculated risk. He is betting that Reform UK can attract enough moderate voters to offset the fallout from distancing the party from Tommy Robinson and his supporters. In a political environment increasingly shaped by social media, this approach could either strengthen the party's appeal or fracture its foundation. The early signs are mixed. Many online conversations indicate that Reform's move away from Robinson is being interpreted by some as a betrayal of the very grassroots base that propelled the party forward. On platforms like X, formerly Twitter, disillusioned supporters have voiced their frustration, accusing the party of abandoning the principles and people it once pledged to represent. For Tice, the road ahead requires a delicate balancing act. Reform UK must address public concerns on pivotal national issues such as immigration, national sovereignty, and policing, while carefully avoiding rhetoric that could alienate potential moderate supporters. His goal is to reframe reform as a credible political alternative, moving beyond the confines of populism to position the party as a serious opposition force capable of influencing mainstream British politics. However, this repositioning carries significant risks. Reform's success hinges on whether it can attract enough moderates to replace the grassroots voters who feel marginalised by the exclusion of Robinson and his followers. The party must walk a fine line, appealing to a broader audience without diluting the anti-establishment message that initially gave it momentum. If the discontent among Robinson's supporters continues to grow, it could create lasting fractures within the party, undermining its electoral prospects. The coming months will be critical for Tice and Reform UK as they seek to redefine their identity and build a coalition that can challenge the political status quo. Whether this gamble will pay off or backfire remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: Reform cannot afford to alienate either side of its divided base if it hopes to remain relevant in Britain's increasingly volatile political landscape. Nigel Farage's role in this political shift has not been without controversy. While he is widely celebrated as a champion of free speech and civil liberties, some of his supporters feel let down by his reluctance to address Tommy Robinson's situation directly. This hesitation is viewed by critics as selective advocacy, with Farage choosing to focus on less contentious issues to preserve his relevance and maintain a safer position within mainstream politics. For some supporters, this perceived inconsistency tarnishes his reputation as a steadfast defender of individual freedoms. They argue that championing civil liberties requires standing up for them universally, even when it involves divisive figures like Robinson. To these followers, picking and choosing which cases to support based on political expediency undermines the principles Farage claims to represent. If he continues to avoid the issue, Farage risks alienating a significant segment of his base, those who value unwavering commitment to free speech and civil liberties over strategic convenience. Robinson's accusations that Farage and Tice are deeply intertwined with the political establishment add a new layer of complexity, challenging the core narrative that both men have cultivated. Farage and Tice have long branded themselves as disruptors, presenting Reform UK as an alternative to traditional politics. However, if Robinson's portrayal of Reform UK as a shallow rebranding of establishment politics resonates with the public, it could erode the party's grassroots support. Voters frustrated with mainstream politics in search of genuine anti-establishment voices may abandon Reform UK in favour of movements or leaders they perceive as offering more authentic opposition to the status quo. Allegations that Nigel Farage may have previously collaborated with groups critical of right-wing figures are adding fuel to an already volatile political landscape. To supporters of Tommy Robinson, these claims cast doubt on Farage's consistency and commitment to his principles, suggesting that his recent actions may be more focused on maintaining public favour and managing optics than adhering to steadfast ideals. Critics argue that if Reform UK supporters begin to perceive Farage as someone willing to sacrifice core values for political expediency, the party's populist base could erode, undermining the very appeal that has long defined his political brand. This narrative plays into Robinson's portrayal of himself as a genuine outsider, one who recognized and exposed the establishment's contradictions long before others did. With Farage now facing scrutiny over his alleged compromises, Robinson's messaging could resonate more deeply with disillusioned voters, potentially siphoning off support from Reform UK. If these tensions continue to grow, they could signal a deeper fragmentation within the party's base, posing a significant challenge to Reform UK's ability to maintain unity and electoral momentum. What do you think of these developments? Could Farage's image suffer irreparable damage if these allegations gain traction, or will he be able to weather the storm? Will Robinson's outsider narrative draw supporters away from Reform UK, reshaping the populist landscape? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has continued to express concerns about the direction of the UK's economic policy, intensifying his criticism of the government's recent budget, which he has labelled the most socialist in living memory. Farage argues that the budget's focus on increased government intervention, wealth redistribution, and higher taxes threatens to stifle economic growth and discourage entrepreneurship. In his view, the government's policies risk creating a dependency on public spending while neglecting the importance of a vibrant private sector. He contends that a sustainable recovery can only be achieved by scaling back government expenditure and empowering businesses to lead the charge through innovation and market-driven growth. Critics of the budget share Farage's concerns, warning that prioritizing redistribution over expansion could deter private investment, especially as the UK competes for capital in an increasingly globalized economy. Business leaders have cautioned that rising taxes and regulatory costs could place significant burdens on enterprises, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, which are critical drivers of job creation. A shrinking appetite for private investment, coupled with the pressure on SMEs, could hinder innovation and limit job opportunities, further complicating the country's path to economic recovery. Amid these economic debates, Reform UK faces a challenging road as it works to establish itself as a credible alternative to the political mainstream. The party must navigate the delicate balance between maintaining its grassroots appeal, which draws support from disillusioned voters eager for radical change, and expanding its reach to a more moderate electorate in pursuit of legitimacy. As Reform UK strives to gain traction, this balancing act could alienate some of its original supporters who favoured the party's more uncompromising positions. The challenge of evolving from a protest movement into a viable political force will shape its future, with the potential for either long-term growth or internal fragmentation. The future of Reform UK largely depends on the strategic decisions made by Richard Tice and Nigel Farage as they attempt to guide the party through a crucial period of transition. Their success will hinge on whether they can attract a coalition of moderate, disillusioned voters while still maintaining a meaningful connection with their grassroots supporters, many of whom remain loyal to the party's original mission. If they strike the right balance, Reform UK has the potential to position itself as a serious opposition force in British politics. However, the risk of alienating either its base or new supporters is significant. A growing rift between the party's traditional supporters, who may view recent shifts as ideological compromises, and its more centrist ambitions could weaken internal cohesion, causing momentum to stall. To survive and thrive, Reform UK must reconcile its founding principles with the realities of an evolving political landscape, carefully managing its messaging to appeal to a broader electorate without diluting its identity. How the leadership navigates this tension will be critical to the party's long-term viability and relevance in the shifting dynamics of British politics.